Today is the start of an exciting journey around the world. As we look ahead at 2025, we're thinking of where we might want to travel in the new year. At Travel Lemming, one of our biggest and most exciting projects is our annual collaborative article on the best places to travel for the coming year. And guess what? We've just released our list of the top places to travel in 2025. So you can check that out on travellemming.com, or you can search the best places to Travel Lemming on whatever search engine you use. Now, for those of you who don't know, Travel Lemming is an online travel guide. We have over 10 million annual readers, over 1,500 guides, tons of perspective pieces coming out all the time from our team of dozens of local and expert travelers who really know their destinations like the back of their hand. We talked about this project before in our second episode with Nate, who told us all about why you should visit Yucatan, Mexico, which was our number one on our list of places to travel in 2024. Well, today I'm excited to co-host with Laura McFarlane, one of our senior travel writers at Travel Lemming, who landed the number one spot on our 2025 list. So she's going to tell us all about Lombok, Indonesia, and why this should be at the top of your 2025 travel bucket list. I'll introduce her in just a moment, but right now, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel because we've got a lot more on this list coming soon. For our next episode, Nate and I are going to be interviewing the rest of the writers who contributed to get their takes on the other 49 destinations on our 2025 list. So it's going to be a lovely collaboration. You'll learn tons about some of the most incredible places in the world, and you'll get to meet more of our team members. So whether you're a consistent traveler or take one big trip a year, I guarantee that there is a destination for everyone on this list. And again, you can check that out on travellemming.com. In addition to Lombok, we're also going to discuss the reopening of Notre Dame, an immersive and controversial gladiator experience of the Colosseum, how to stay healthy while traveling, and much more. So we've got a jam-packed episode for you today. It's going to be a good one. Welcome to the Travel Lemming podcast, where we offer expert insight on destinations and give you the tools to become a better traveler. I'm your host, Betty Hurd, and I'm joined today by Laura McFarlane. Laura, thank you so much for being here today. How are you doing?
Thank you so much for having me, Betty. I'm super excited to be here and be on the Travel Lemming podcast.
Yes, I'm so happy that you're here too. I know you have a lot to talk about Lombok, and then we also have some great news stories and perspectives to cover. I'd love to hear a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, of course. So I am a senior travel writer with Travel Lemming. I'm based out of San Francisco, so I do a lot of guides on local tips to travel in San Francisco, Northern California, or just California as a whole. I also just got back from a one-year backpacking trip around the world. I visited 3 continents, 20 countries, and just had an amazing time full of incredible travel experiences. So I've been writing a lot of travel stories about my time over the past year that you can also read on Travel Lemming.
Yes, I know you have written some really awesome, interesting perspectives and guides, and I just know you had the adventure of a lifetime on your year of travel. So I highly encourage our listeners to go check out Laura's articles on the website.
Thank you so much. For our first segment, we're going to dive into talking about what's new in travel. For our first story, I'm talking about a methanol poisoning incident that happened at a hostel in Southeast Asia. 6 tourists died at a hostel in Vang Vieng, Laos, after drinking locally made spirits that were laced with methanol.
And Laura, where is Vang Vieng?
Yeah, great question. Vang Vieng is in northern Laos in Southeast Asia. It's a fixture on the so-called Banana Pancake Trail, which is popular destinations in Southeast Asia that backpackers visit quite frequently. So Vang Vieng itself is a really popular spot for tubing and outdoor adventure activities. It's surrounded by mountains. There's a beautiful river that runs through it. But it's also a really popular place for partying and going out and about in the evening hours.
Gotcha. So you said that these backpackers died after drinking spirits laced with methanol. So what exactly is methanol?
Yeah, I had to look this one up. Methanol is a toxic substance that is sometimes added to bootleg alcohol or alcohol that's being made illegally or homemade alcohol. It's used to make the drink taste stronger or get the person who's drinking it maybe drunk a little bit faster. And backpackers were given free shots at the hostel before heading out for the night. And at the end of the night, 5 young women and 1 man died in the days that followed. It's super scary. My heart really breaks for these families. I've personally traveled through Southeast Asia, and I think what people maybe who haven't been there don't fully understand is that everywhere you go, there is this huge culture of drinking and partying. And, hostels that I stayed at, it was really common to have a free shot given to you before you head out for the night. Like, it's not something that I ever thought twice about as being unsafe, just because it was so prevalent traveling throughout these countries. And I don't think it's something that necessarily reflects poorly on the country itself. I had really wonderful experiences traveling in Southeast Asia. But it is really, really scary. And I'm just so sad to hear about these backpackers that were there to explore and there to adventure and then had a really, really unfortunate incident happen.
It's so sad. And I mean, really with anything or someone stranger handing you something that you don't know where it came from or what it
Mhm.
is. I mean, it could have happened really anywhere.
It really could have happened anywhere. It could have happened to anyone. And I think just for travelers that are going to places, or honestly anyone, I know the Australian government has put out a statement warning tourists not to drink specifically tiger vodka or tiger whiskey. Now, I'm not sure if these specific brands are what caused the poisoning, but this is just what I've heard that the Australian government is warning tourists about. But I think in the future, I'm going to be a little bit more careful about maybe only drinking beer or something that hasn't been poured to me. But again, like I never would have expected it. I never would have known. It's so common to just be handed a free shot and just to not think twice about it at
Yeah.
all. My second story that I would love to talk about is a bit of a lighter note. Notre Dame is reopening in December for the first time since the 2019 fire. So, Notre Dame obviously is a world famous cathedral in Paris, and it's going to reopen after being closed to public visits for the past 5 years.
Yes, I heard about that. So, can you remind listeners what exactly happened and why they closed it in the first place?
Yeah, it caught fire in April of 2019. They're still not entirely sure what started the fire. It was either a cigarette that hadn't fully been put out or maybe some kind of electrical malfunction. But it's been closed for public visits for the past 5 years, and they're going to reopen it in December. The first 6 months of the reopening, so from December until June of 2025, the cathedral will only be open to individuals and worshippers only. So group tours will have to wait until after June of 2025. They're also implementing a booking system to manage crowds. So you'll have to book a time slot online in order to go visit. Walk ins will be allowed, but the lines will probably be super long, so I think it's better to book ahead.
Gotcha. Well, I think that's really nice that they're kind of saving it for those 6 months just for the people who want to worship and not having it
Mhm.
absolutely flooded with tourists right away.
Well, tourists will be able to go, but again, it's just for individual tourists. So any of these big group tours that maybe are organized by a third party or outside organization will have to wait until after June.
Well, I've also got a couple news stories for you. There was a stowaway who was found on a flight from New York City to Paris just a little bit before Thanksgiving. It was a Delta flight from JFK to Charles de Gaulle. And I thought this was so interesting because, as most of you know, I'm a flight attendant. I can't even imagine how someone could actually make this happen. I mean, this woman, she got past multiple security checkpoints and screenings in the airport and got on the plane without a boarding pass somehow. And then what she was doing was swapping bathrooms the whole flight. And I mean, that's a long flight. It's like, man, I'm not entirely sure, but I think it's over 8 hours. So for her to just be in a bathroom going back and forth, I mean, obviously they did figure out that she was being suspicious at some point in the flight and they did arrest her in Paris. But I can't believe she got that far. So it's pretty wild. There's a lot of investigations going on as to how she even got on the plane because clearly this is a huge breach of security. And apparently, Delta Airlines is a little bit under scrutiny right now, which makes sense. So we'll see what happens there. I would love to find out more information on how she actually did it.
Wait, so she was just switching between bathrooms for the entire flight?
They said that she was in the very back bathroom for when they took off, so no one realized that she didn't have a seat because she was just hiding in there, which the flight attendants are supposed to check the bathroom, so someone made a mistake there. And then I guess she just
Oh
kept
my
going from
gosh.
bathroom to bathroom, and it was on a big airplane, so, like, there were different cabins where people may not have really noticed that she was just, like, swapping around, but she's a wild one. And for my next story, Airbnb plans to host an immersive gladiator experience in the Colosseum. So this is supposed to take place in May of next year in 2025. And people are not happy about it, especially the Roman politicians. They're talking about how Airbnb is just making a mockery of the Colosseum. And honestly, I would have to agree. I think that it's a little strange to bring these tourists into this wildly historical place where very terrible, gruesome things happened, and then say, "Hey, we're gonna dress you up in some armor, and you guys get to fake fight each other. Woohoo!" So I get why the politicians are upset. They're also saying that Airbnb is kind of doing this under the facade that they are funding an educational program for the company that keeps up the Colosseum, like does the upkeep.
Mm.
And so they're like, oh, we're going to contribute to this educational program. So it's a good thing. But the Colosseum, like all the Roman politicians have been saying, we don't need more tourists. We're not struggling to get tourists to the Colosseum. This is not something that needs to happen. We have enough money. And really, this is just kind of a joke. So what do you think about it, Laura?
Yeah, it's not like no one had heard of the Roman Colosseum until Gladiator came out, until like Paul Mescal made it famous. So I completely agree. I think that if the Roman government is telling you, hey, this isn't really something that we need or would be helpful to our city and might actually contribute to more harm than good, I think that that's definitely something to listen to. Always listen to the locals.
I agree. And for our next segment, we are going to talk about some of the perspective pieces that we've enjoyed on travellemming.com. So these are pieces that our team of writers comes up with about more personal experiences, unique situations that they've had while traveling around the world. And so today I'm going to kick that off with Chelsea's article on her rules to staying healthy while traveling. So the title is I follow these simple rules to stay healthy and feel my best when I travel. So she just gives a whole list of really great ideas just to be proactive when you're traveling. And I know what it's like to travel and not be prepared for a hangover or a cold or just being exhausted from going. So her first thing on the list is that you need a travel pharmacy kit. This is basically just having like a little makeup bag with,
Hmm.
she's got Advil, hand sanitizer, Dramamine, and Metamucil, just like all these little bits and pieces for whatever you're feeling, which I think is brilliant because that could really save you on some of those really bad
Hmm.
days when you're not at home. And the second thing she says is to book a hotel with a gym or ensure it's at least by a trail. And this, I am always traveling and I can say I rarely see a hotel gym, but it is nice to have that option if you just want to get some exercise in, especially if you're in a place where there's really rich food and you just are kind of feeling lethargic. I think it is really nice to have the option to get a little workout in, or like she said, hit the trail. And she also talks about avoiding burnout by limiting your plans and not being afraid to abandon them entirely. And I think this is so
Hmm.
important. Like when I travel, sometimes I just overbook myself so bad that then I'm so burnt out the next couple of days that don't feel like doing anything. So I really appreciated some
Hmm.
of her points in here. She's got some other great points too, but I'm going to kick it back to you in just a second, Laura. But yeah, I highly encourage anyone who goes on long trips to check this out. Chelsea's got some really great advice on just how to make sure you feel your best while you're out and about.
Getting sick while traveling is one of the worst experiences known to man. I completely agree with this article. And then also eating super rich foods for days on end and just feeling so lethargic and heavy and bloated can sometimes really put a damper in your experience there. So I really like her tip about making sure to stay near a walking path or some kind of gym. It's really common to walk a lot anyway when you're traveling, but I loved this article as well. I'm so happy that you brought this to the table, Betty.
Yes, of course. Yeah, Chelsea's got some great pieces for sure. So, what have you picked out for us today?
Yeah, the first article that I wanted to highlight was Rachel's list of hidden gem activities in Paris. So, the full title of the article is My Favorite Off the Beaten Path Activities and Events in Paris. And this was written by our Parisian local Rachel, who I believe has lived in Paris for the last 10 years or so. And like, I've been to Paris about 4 times now. It's one of my favorite cities to travel in. I also kind of speak French, so I think I just love it so much because I could feel like I could maybe pass as a local, not really. But at this point, I've done all the touristy stuff, so I really loved this article because she has such excellent suggestions of places to go. There's a few that are in her list that I've actually done already. She mentions the artist collective known as 59 Rivoli. It's a multi-level artist studio and exhibition space. You can go in and walk through 4 or 5 floors of studio space and look at art. It has incredible views over Paris. It's free, which is great. And it was one of my favorite things that I did on my most recent trip to Paris. So I'm happy to see that she put that in the article. And now I know that when I go back, I'm going to reference this list to see which new activities I should be looking to do.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to have to reference this one the next time I go.
So, the last story that I want to talk about is actually, Betty, your story about getting denied entry from China. This one was so funny to me. And I can relate to having visa problems, but I mean, it's your article. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got denied entry from China?
Sure thing. Yeah, it was quite the experience. It was by far the worst travel experience I've ever had in my life. So I'm a flight attendant currently based in San Francisco, but when I first started out, I was in New Jersey. And when I was there, we weren't required to have a Chinese visa because we didn't
Mhm.
have any flights there. So it makes sense. When I transferred to San Francisco, I asked my supervisor, I already had a travel visa to China from when I'd gone on a study abroad trip in 2019. So I
Mhm.
showed them and I said, "Hey, does this work?" And he was like, "Should be good." And I just didn't really think anything of it because, turning to someone of authority at work and getting an answer, no matter how
Yeah.
vague, I just was like, "He knows what he's talking about." So I was on standby, which is when you sit at the airport for 4 hours, and if they need you really last second for a flight, you go work it. So it was like the moment I got to work, they were like, "Hey, you're flying to Beijing right now." And it's a 15-hour flight, so I was like, "Oh my god," like, I was not expecting to get called at all, but really, it didn't cross my mind at all that I had the wrong visa during this flight. So, I worked the 15 hours there, I'm exhausted, like, so tired because I had no prep
Mhm.
for it, and I get up to the customs guy with my whole crew of, like, 11 of us, and he just immediately opens up my passport and is just like, "Nope, you can't come in." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And, I really thought that he was, like, messing with me. And then this other official came over and just, like, took me away, separated me from my crew. My whole crew's freaking out. They're all, like, really senior, and they've never had this happen before. So, I didn't know what was happening. They didn't know what was happening. I just started crying. I'm in my uniform, and I put on sunglasses in the airport because I didn't want all these passengers to see me. And I was just, like, bawling my eyes out, but, like, still having conversations with this official, and he didn't speak English. Someone else had to come translate. It was a mess, and they actually ended up long story short, I got in contact with my company, and they put me on the same flight that I brought in. So, I was in China for less than 2 hours. I was one of the last people to get back on the same exact plane that I brought in, and it was, like, 13 hours back, and I was still crying. I just kind of slept that whole time because I was so tired and kinda dealt with the
Oh, thank so you
repercussions.
didn't have to work the 13-hour flight back. You just
No,
got to be a
no.
passenger. Oh, thank God.
Yeah, that would have been illegal, yeah. So, at least I didn't have to do that because I couldn't I think in the span of 28 hours, I was flying for 26, like, it was absolutely ridiculous. I've never been so tired in my life. I think I slept for, like, 2 days straight after that, and I was so upset, and it it's funny now, but at the time, I just was so devastated by it, and I felt so dumb. And it is easy to make visa mistakes, like you're saying you've had problems before with your visas, and, like, I just I don't know, I didn't even think twice about it, and now I'm like, "Oh my god, anytime I travel anywhere, I will triple check that I have all of my qualifications for it," because dealing with foreign authorities is so stressful when you don't know what's going on, so I don't recommend it to anyone. What happened with
Yeah.
you?
I was in traveling throughout Southeast Asia, and the visa process, I was pretty careful, like, going into Indonesia first, I was looking up, "Okay, do I need a visa?" But then traveling from Indonesia to Malaysia and Thailand was really relatively easy, and the visa came within, I don't know, maybe 20 minutes online, and so I didn't even think about a visa for Vietnam, and it did not cross my mind. I was in Thailand for, like, a month just having the time of my life and not even thinking about what I needed to prepare for flying to Vietnam the next day. And I was talking to another traveler in my hostel, and he said, "Oh, how is the process of getting a Vietnam visa for you? Like, as an American, it was pretty hard. It took me a few weeks." And my jaw just dropped. And I was like, how could I have been so stupid? I've completely forgotten that, of course, I need a visa because, one, we've had a lot of political turmoil between the US and Vietnam within the past 50 years. So it makes sense that we would need a visa specifically for Vietnam that might be a little bit harder to get than it would be to get a visa for a place like Thailand. So I ended up having to postpone my trip for a few days, and I had to fast track my Vietnam visa. I don't even know if the site that I used was legal or what, but you could pay like $100 extra to have your visa go to the top of the stack, and it was approved within a few hours. But I had to pay to get my flight changed and also pay like $100 to get my visa expedited. And it was just, luckily, it didn't happen in the airport or anything, but it was a hassle.
Ah, sounds so stressful. To anyone listening out there, get your visas
Yes.
and do your research.
Yes.
Well, that's a good segue into our main event for the podcast today, talking about Southeast Asia. And like I said earlier, we just released our list of the top places to travel in 2025. And so the reason Laura is our guest of honor today and my co host is because she wrote about our number one destination, which is Lombok, Indonesia. So I'm going to pass the baton over to Laura, and she's the expert here. So she's going to tell us all about why we should go there. But I want to start by just asking you, why was that a place that you wanted to go in the first place?
Oh, that's a great question. So, for anyone who doesn't know, Lombok is a small island in the Indonesian archipelago. It's the island that's next to Bali, its much more famous neighbor. And so, when I was traveling around Australia before I went to Southeast Asia, I met a lot of people specifically coming from Europe. And it seemed like the common route was to travel from Europe, stop in Southeast Asia, and then go to Australia. So, I was able to get a lot of travel tips from people that I met in Australia who had just spent a few months in Southeast Asia. And people were raving about Bali. It was like all people could talk about. But then I met a guy who pulled me aside and was like, based on your personality and what you've told me you like about travel, don't go to Bali, go to Lombok. And I was like, I have never heard of Lombok. Why should I go to Lombok, not Bali? And he told me Bali is super crowded. It's super touristy. It's incredibly famous. But Lombok is like what Bali was 50 years ago. And that really got me. That was the hook that really pulled me in. And I started doing more research into Lombok and just looking at the kinds of activities you could do there. And yeah, and then I spent 3 weeks there, and it absolutely was just one of my favorite places. I would go back in a heartbeat.
It sounds so beautiful. And I feel like that's always a point of interest for me is going to places that aren't super touristy. And like, obviously, I think most people don't want to go someplace that's super crowded. But the fact that he said, oh, this is what Bali was like 50 years ago. And that's like when it was more untouched, like I would be there in a heartbeat too. So tell us about Lombok and why it's the number one pick for 2025's list.
Yeah, so I spent a good amount of
Hmm.
time traveling around Lombok. I can give you a brief overview of my itinerary and just some of the things that I would recommend doing if you go to visit. It's a beautiful island. There's a few different famous places in Lombok, one of which is the Gili Islands. So this is where I started my travels in Lombok. Gili actually just means island in the local language, so calling it the Gili Islands is like
The Islands.
a Western thing that we do, but that's just what they're colloquially referred to. It's a string of islands that are up in the northwest side of Lombok. So it's a three small islands called Gili Trawangan, Gili Meno, and Gili Air. And Gili Trawangan people call Gili Tea. This is a super famous place among backpackers. So Gili Tea is where you go to party all night, basically. It's known as the party island of Lombok. And I found this really interesting because mainland Lombok is a predominantly Muslim island, and so you won't find a lot of party culture or drinking culture, but all of that is centralized in Gili Tea. So, like, everyone just goes to Gili Tea to travel around this super small island. You could bike around it in about, I would say, 20 minutes. There's no cars allowed on the island. So you travel either by biking or by hopping in a horse-drawn carriage. And the main attraction of Gili Tea is there's surfing, you can snorkel with sea turtles, but the main attraction there is the party scene. So there's a few different hostels around the island, as well as many resorts. But most young people tend to stay in the hostels because they're all considered quote unquote party hostels. And they do a lot of things like beach bar crawls every night. They start playing music at like 10 in the morning and giving you free shots at noon. Like, it does not stop. I had the worst hangover of my entire life on Gili Tea. It is not a place that I am in any hurry to go back to. I spent one day there. I spent 2 days there. I wanted one day to kind of experience the party scene. I don't do a lot of partying, but, I wanted to see what it was about.
Right.
And then I spent the next day recovering from the party scene that I had explored the day before. So it was fine. It's a really popular place. I don't know that it's my scene. I really loved Gili Air. So compared to Gili Tea, Gili Air is like a breath of fresh air. It's so relaxed, so chill. You could snorkel with sea turtles. You can just relax on the beach and suntan. You can look at coral reefs. It's so laid back. I ended up spending a few more days here and had a really, really lovely time. Just like these white sand beaches, palm trees, this amazing vegan food cafe that I found next to my hostel that like I don't typically eat vegan food, but this was some of the best food I've ever had in my life. It was incredible and all local stuff. So I really loved Gili Air. Yeah, so the Gili Islands are a huge part of why so many people know of Lombok, but a lot of people don't make it onto the mainland Lombok. Like I heard of so many travelers who were just going to the Gili Islands to go hang out and party on Gili tea. And I'm like, no, 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 you're missing so many of the better spots. Like, I loved Gili Air, and then some of the spots on the mainland that I'll talk about in a little bit were just, yeah, absolutely breathtaking.
So, just to paint a picture for listeners, so there's Bali, where a lot of people know like where Bali is, and Lombok is just to the east of Bali, correct?
Mhm.
And so then these
Yes.
three main Gilis are to the northwest of Lombok, which is the bigger main island. And I know that there's a bunch of smaller islands too, but those three are the main ones. And how do you
Mhm.
get to them? Is it like a ferry? Do people fly? Or is there even an airport on those really tiny islands? Or do you just take like a ferry boat?
There's not an airport on the small islands. Lombok, the main island, does have an international airport. But I flew into Bali because I wanted to spend a few days in Bali beforehand. And then it's super easy to get between Bali and Lombok. There are fast boats that you can buy a ticket ahead of time. It takes about, I would say, 2 to 4 hours to travel by boat between Bali and Lombok. It depends which port you depart from and which port you arrive to. But there are really, these boats are super popular. There's multiple that run a day. The one thing that I would recommend for anyone out there who's thinking of traveling to Lombok, the seas can get a bit rough at times. And the day that we flew into Bali, I had flown into Bali and wanted to go to Lombok the very next day. So I check into my hostel in Bali and I'm like asking the guy at the front desk, hey, I have a boat ticket booked for Lombok the next day. And he just looks at me and laughs and is like, you're not going to Lombok tomorrow. And I was like, what do you mean? And he said the seas are way too rough. There's a storm coming in. We're closing all boat crossings for the next 4 or 5 days, probably.
Oh my
So just
goodness.
hang out here for a while. And I had no idea. And this is, I think, very, very common, especially in the tropics, especially if it's the rainy season, the weather can be unpredictable. So I would just recommend anywhere in Southeast Asia, but especially if you're traveling between Bali and Lombok, to just have some flexibility in your travel plans because I ended up having to stay in Bali for 5 days before I could head to Lombok. And so I had to rearrange some of the things that I had already booked, but it's super easy to rearrange. And so make sure that when you get to Bali, if you're flying into Bali first and then planning on boating over to Lombok, I would package in a few buffer days if the seas are rough and if you can't get those boats over.
Good tip. Definitely have some flexibility in your schedule there. So, okay, when you got from Bali over to Lombok, what was the first thing that you did there?
So the first thing that I did was spend a few days on Gili Tea and Gili Air. And then, because the boat from Bali to Lombok does stop at the Gili Islands up north because there's such backpacker hotspots. So I started there, and then from the Gili Islands to the main island of Lombok, it's only about a 10-minute boat ride. It's super easy. You can catch it at any time of day. And so I took the main boat over to Lombok, and then I had actually found a sailboat that I wanted to work on because I've always wanted to learn how to sail. And I wrote a whole article about it. It's up on Travel Lemming under our perspectives section. But I sailed down the west coast of Lombok for 7 days. So I started up north and then I worked on a sailboat and stopped in a town called Singigi, which is about halfway down the main island of Lombok, and spent a day there and was able to explore that area. And then I sailed down to an island chain known as the Secret Gilis, which I was like, that sounds interesting. What are the Secret Gilis? They are a group of, again, Gili means island. So it's a group of islands that are similar to the popular Gili Islands up north, but just so untouched. Like it's mostly locals that live there. There's not a lot of tourist infrastructure, but if you're looking for a really untouched area of Lombok to go visit, the Secret Gilis are where you're going to find that. Like I spent days just wandering around, gosh, I want to say 10 to 15 small islands, but I only visited 3 or 4 of them. But I was walking around an island and I saw maybe one other tourist there the whole time. And
Wow.
so it was really cool being on this sailboat because I was able to see a side of Indonesia that I hadn't experienced before because I was going to these less touristy places. And it's really easy to get to the Secret Gilis if you don't work on a sailboat, you don't have to work on a sailboat to get to the secret Gilis. But they are quite close to the southwestern side of Lombok. And so you can take a normal ferry to get there as well. But yeah, there's not a lot of tourism infrastructure there. But I chatted with some locals. I met a girl who was working at the bar in one of the marinas there in the town on the port. And we just had this whole conversation. Even though there's a language barrier, she spoke a little bit of English. I do not speak any of her language. But
Huh.
we were able to just chat about our lives. And she was telling me about how she, wants to go to university someday, wants to study English. And it was just so fun to have these kinds of conversations. That is one of the things that I love so much about travel, of just meeting people that are very similar to you, even though you live on completely opposite sides of the world and you have very different upbringings. But it was really fun to be able to get a more local side to Indonesia. So that's what I loved about the Secret Gilis.
That sounds so amazing. So I want to know more about the sailboat. You said you've never worked on a sailboat before, you've never sailed. How did you get a job doing this?
Great question. Again, so much of backpacker knowledge is just passed through word of mouth. So meeting people that you've met through hostels or something like that, you find out so many little travel tips. And I met a couple in Fiji, actually, who had just sailed from Panama and crossed the Pacific and landed in Fiji, and they had never been on a sailboat before. And I said, how on earth did you do this? That sounds amazing. And they pointed me to this website called Find a Crew. And so you can go on Find a Crew, make a profile, and you can look at different sailboats who their captains are looking for crew to come help out for a few weeks and just like work on the boat. So you don't have to pay for it, which is great, but you do have to work really hard. You are up at 7 a.m., you are mopping the deck, you are hoisting the sails, but it's a great learning experience.
Oh,
The boat that I chose was a little less intense than some other boats. So they only required that I stay for a week, which was great because I was like, I've never lived on a sailboat before. I think a week is a really good amount of time to start off with. But they have been sailing around Indonesia for the past 2 years, so they knew a lot of the spots. I ended up working with an Italian captain and his British partner, and so we sailed together. And I would say for anyone out there who's considering doing this, for me as a solo female traveler, I really liked the fact that the boat that I chose, there was another woman on board, like the captain's wife was there. So that made me feel a little bit safer than just going on a boat with like a random person. But the thing that I also like about Find a Crew is that you can read reviews of past crew that have worked on these boats. It's a website that's pretty similar to Workaway, if anyone's ever used Workaway or Worldpackers, where you just can read reviews that other travelers have posted. And so that made me feel a lot more confident about my safety going into this.
that is so cool. I have never heard of that in my life. And now I'm like, I need to pack my bags and go work on a boat.
It was hard. Like, if you read my article, there were definitely times when I was like, what have I gotten myself into?
Yeah.
I got so sunburnt, I got seasick, but it was also an amazing time and allowed me to see a different side of Indonesia.
Oh my gosh, it's incredible. And so you said that you felt safe like on the boating trip. And so how was safety just as a whole in Lombok and the Gilis?
Safety, I felt really safe the whole time that I was traveling in Lombok. It is a Muslim island, so it is a little bit more conservative. So if you've seen pictures of people traveling in Bali and they're riding around on scooters wearing just like a bikini top and a little mesh skirt, you don't really want to do that in Lombok. It's polite to be a little more conservative with your dress, just given that it is a Muslim island. One of the reasons that I think Lombok is becoming more popular now than it has been in the past is because it did have a few incidents of some terrorist activity about 20 years ago. I don't know much about it, but I do know that it's been very, very safe for the past 10 to 15 years. It's got a booming tourism industry now. After I sailed around the secret Gilis, I went to Kuta down south, which is the big tourist hotspot in Lombok. So if you're going to stay anywhere in Lombok and you want more Western comforts, Kuta is where you're going to find that. So there's a lot of resorts in Kuta, a lot of restaurants. You can walk by and get Indonesian food, or you can go to a pizza place or a vegan place. So in Kuta, I felt very safe because, again, the tourism industry is a huge part of that town in particular.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Because I know, especially like, obviously, we're not going to make our number one spot on this list, someplace that isn't necessarily safe, but it's
Yeah.
great to hear that it's good for anyone from families to solo travelers. So I want to get into more of your favorite things to do on the island while you were
hmm
there. And again, what year was this? I don't know if we already stated that, but I just want to make sure people have an idea of when you were there and how long.
Yeah, I was in Lombok for 3 weeks in March and April of 2024.
That's awesome. So, yeah, if you want to dive into some of your favorite activities outside of sailing, I know that you said I've seen a lot of mentions of surfing there, that it's a big surf scene.
Yes. Lombok is huge with surfing, especially in Kuta. So, one of the reasons that Kuta has evolved to be the kind of tourist hotspot that it is because it's down south, it's right on the beach, and it's where all of these incredible waves start coming in. So, Bali, if anyone's been surfing in Bali, it's very crowded. The waves are incredible, but it's very crowded. Lombok is where you'll get these exact same beautiful waves with much better conditions. So, not as many crowds. A surf camp is really popular in Lombok. So, there's a few different hostels that will offer surfing as part of the package. So, if anyone is looking to go surf and make friends, whether you're a beginner or an expert, surf camps are a huge part of Kuta. So, that's something that I saw a lot. I didn't go surfing personally because I had been surfing quite a few times before and it wasn't on my list of things to do. I also had gotten crazy sunburnt while working on the sailboat and actually had to stay out of the water for
Oh,
7 days.
no.
So that is specifically why I didn't go surfing in Kuta, but I just heard from people that were staying in the resort that I was staying in that it is just incredible conditions and a great place to learn or go if you're an expert. I've recommended it to quite a few surfers that I know. But besides surfing, I loved Lombok because I was able to learn how to drive a motorbike there. Motorbikes are the main mode of transportation for getting around in many places in Southeast Asia. But when I was in Bali, I was so scared to try to learn how to drive my own motorbike because the roads are super crowded, super packed. Again, I sound like I'm saying the same thing over and over again, but Lombok is just much less crowded. And so I was able to get on a motorbike and learn how to drive my own motorbike around the jungles in Lombok without all of these cars around me. And it was incredible. It was so fun to learn, and it gave me a lot more confidence for continuing in my Southeast Asia travels, where I was then able to rent my own motorbike and feel a lot more confident on the roads when I was driving in like Thailand or Vietnam, for example.
Oh my gosh, I think motorbikes are the most fun mode of transportation in the world.
They are so fun.
It's so fun and it's pretty affordable to just rent a motorbike, and then you have the freedom to go all over the place, right?
Super affordable. It's the best way to get around. And so I stayed in Kuta for about 4 or 5 days. I would have loved to stay for longer, but we had booked a tour of Mount Rinjani, which is another great thing to do in Lombok that I'll talk about in a little bit. But yeah, spending 4 or 5 days in Kuta, I could have easily stayed there for longer. But the main things that I did was listen to people talk about surfing and wish that I was out there in the water surfing with them and relax at the amazing resort that I booked. It was so affordable. I chose a resort because it was my birthday and I wanted to ball out a little bit and rather than staying in a hostel. But the resort, I was amazed. It was only $60 a night for a private cottage. And so, split between me and my partner that I was traveling with, that's only $30 a night per person. And the resort that we stayed in was incredible. It had two different pools. It had cabanas all around the pool where you could just go lounge on the cabana and then order food that was delivered to you. And it was the most amazing little hideaway to come back to after a day spent exploring the town, exploring the beaches. I just loved it and I could have stayed there for a lot longer. But there was also a lot of really affordable hostels in town. I would say hostels were about like $10 a night. And so if I had wanted to stay longer, I probably would have gone to a hostel instead.
Yeah, so in terms of budget with really everything, like the getting there, the food, stays, if you want to elaborate a little bit more on that, it sounds like it's wildly affordable compared to most places all over the world.
Yeah, I would say it's pretty standard for a lot of places in Southeast Asia. Definitely cheaper than Bali, which I loved. I don't know how much a flight from the US would cost because I flew in from Australia. So flying in from Australia to Bali was about $200 one way. And then getting from Bali to Lombok, it was about $30, $30 to $40 for the fast boat. Again, you can fly directly into Lombok, but I chose to fly into Bali first and then take the boat over to Lombok so that I could see Bali for a little bit before going to Lombok. But in terms of food and drink and activity, beer is like $1, water 50 cents. Food, a typical meal will be anywhere from $3 to $5. If you're going for a Western meal, like if you're getting a pizza or a hamburger, it's going to be more expensive. It'll be more like $8 or $9 or $10. But if you're eating local food or a pot of noodles or some mee goreng or nasi goreng, that's going to be about like between $2 to $5 per meal.
Yeah, what is the local cuisine like? This sounds ridiculous, but the only time I've ever had Indonesian food is at a Dutch restaurant that I used to work at because there's like a really strong Indonesian influence in the Netherlands. And so I've only had like nasi goreng and it was at the Dutch restaurant. So what is that? What do they eat? If you want to go into that a bit.
Yeah, not ridiculous. The Dutch originally colonized Indonesia, and so that's why there's a huge exchange of those cultures. Mie goreng is a fried noodle, and nasi goreng is a fried rice. And so those are the two kind of main things that I was eating all the time. There is a lot more in Indonesian food, but I was less adventurous than I would have liked to be. I kind of found my favorites and I stuck with that. The best thing was that there are lots of fresh fruits and fresh smoothies. I ate a lot of like mangoes and yeah, it was very affordable, very good. And the nice thing about staying in Kuta specifically is that you can break up eating local food with eating maybe like something from home that you're really craving
Yeah.
or some kind of fusion cuisine. I had a really good Asian fusion meal for my birthday dinner when I was in Kuta and it was just delicious. So there's definitely options. But if you're staying in one of the more smaller areas in the secret Gilis or up north, you'll have mostly local food.
Yeah. Well, it's nice that they have some variety and it's not all just the same thing.
Yeah, and it's really easy to make it vegetarian. Like the nasi goreng or mie goreng, you can get with any kind of meat or you can just get it plain vegetarian. And so that was nice. I never got sick. I never got any kind of food poisoning or any kind of stomach issues, which I was very happily surprised about. It's great.
Yes, of course. No, it sounds like such a wonderful place. So, did you happen to hike? I read a little bit about the volcano there. Is that correct?
Yes. After staying in Kuta for a few days down south, then I booked a tour to hike the second tallest volcano in Indonesia, which is Mount Rinjani. It's located in the north of Lombok. And so the geography of Lombok is really interesting. The south has the amazing beaches. So the south is where you're going to want to go for surfing, for relaxing on the beach, for driving motorbikes through rice paddies and going up to these beautiful hills that overlook miles of white beaches and absolutely gorgeous setting. And then the north of Lombok is where you're going to find the more jungly, mountainous interior. There's a lot of monkeys. There's a lot of really cool wildlife. There's waterfalls, like so many waterfalls. And so I knew that I wanted to see this northern area of Lombok as well. So when I was in Kuta, I booked a tour to hike to the top of Mount Rinjani. It's very important you need to book a tour in order to hike to the top because it is literally a giant volcano. You have to do it with a guide or else you're going to get lost. It's also much harder than I thought it was going to be. I think I was coming from, like, I grew up in California. I've hiked mountains in the Sierra Nevada mountains. I've hiked a couple of 14ers over in Colorado. I was like, I got this. I'm used to climbing tall mountains.
Mhm.
Mount Rinjani is about 12,000 feet, so it's not the highest mountain that I've ever hiked, but it starts at literally sea level. So you are hiking 12,000 feet. And that is not a lot of time to adjust to the elevation change. But
Yeah, seriously.
that was what surprised me the most was that it was a lot harder, but it was, oh my gosh, the views were incredible. You start in this mountain town called Senaru. So you do actually have you start at about like 2,000 feet of elevation. So I would recommend maybe staying in Senaru a few extra days to just start adjusting to the elevation, especially if you're coming from a beach town like Kuta, where you again are at like zero,
Yeah.
where you're just at sea level. Senaru is amazing because the town itself has more to do than just see Mount Rinjani. There's a few additional hikes that you can do that are supposed to be really amazing. I was mainly there to hike Mount Rinjani, so I didn't get to do these hikes, but you don't just have to go to hike a 12,000-foot volcano. There's beautiful hikes. There's incredible waterfalls. So we got into Senaru, and one of the first things we did was do a super easy day hike to this beautiful waterfall. It's been called the most beautiful waterfall in Lombok. It's Tiu Kalep Waterfall, and it just was one of the most amazing waterfalls I've ever seen. And the jungle there is just so beautiful. And then the next day, we got up super early to hike Mount Rinjani. And we chose to do a 2-day hike. So you hike up to this crater that overlooks the volcano in the middle of a caldera. I don't really know how to describe it, but it is absolutely stunning, unlike anything I've ever seen before. And then you go to bed around 8 p.m. and you get woken up at 2 a.m. the next morning. and you are hiking to the top of this volcano in the dark. And then
Oh,
you get to the top and you watch sunrise. You can see Mount Rinjani is pretty inland in the north of the island of Lombok, but from the top of the mountain, you could see all the way to the ocean. So I was just standing on top of this mountain at 6 in the morning, watching the sun come up, just seeing all of Lombok spread out before me, and just the hues and colors of this volcano. There's like red volcanic rock, and then there's also the black volcanic rock, and then there's the bright blue of this lake that's right below you, and then the green, like lush jungle spread out beneath you, and then you could see all the way to the ocean. And I cried at the top, partly because I was exhausted, and also partly because it is, to this day, one of my favorite, most amazing views I've ever seen, and I would recommend it to anyone that's going to Lombok.
oh, it sounds like such an emotional, beautiful experience.
Yes, it was.
That is so cool. So it's a multiple day hike.
You can do it, yeah. It's if you want to go to the top, you can choose from either a 2 or 3 day hike. If you want to just go up to this crater where you can see the volcano but not hike to the top of it, you can do just a day hike. So there are a few different options, but you start in Senaru. And the really nice thing about booking a tour is that they'll transport you from wherever you are in Lombok. They'll just put you in a car and drive you right to where the homestay is. And so that's another really cool part about going to Senaru, is that you get to see a different side of Indonesian accommodation. So in Kuta, I was staying in a resort, and there's lots of hostels around. But the time that I got to stay in a homestay was up north in Senaru. And that was really wonderful because I got to stay with a family and have them cook for me and just experience a different side of incredible Indonesian hospitality.
Oh, that sounds so, so cool. Oh my goodness. Well, as we wrap up, I wanted to ask, what is the best time of year to go?
Yeah, I would recommend going in the dry season. So Lombok's dry season is April through October. This is best if you're hoping to hike Mount Rinjani, because Mount Rinjani is only open to hike in the dry season. So it completely shuts down during the wet season. So don't try to hike Mount Rinjani if you're visiting Lombok anytime between November and March. But just in general, the dry season is really great because it's when the surfing conditions are going to be best. It's when hiking conditions are going to be best, and you won't get caught in a midday monsoon. So April through October is when I would recommend visiting.
So just to summarize, why as a whole should I or anyone listening go to Lombok? I know you've talked all about this incredible place, the food, the budget, the safety, the things to do. And if you could just put it into a couple of sentences, what would you say about visiting Lombok?
If you're looking for a more off the beaten path side of Indonesia, what Bali was like 50 years ago, go to Lombok. Bali is crowded, Lombok is not. Bali is expensive, Lombok is not. You could do all of the amazing things that you can do in Bali, you can do in Lombok. Surfing, riding motorbikes through rice paddies, hiking to waterfalls and to the tops of volcanoes, experiencing amazing local cuisine and hospitality. It's all there. It's all in Lombok, and it's going to become much more popular soon. So I would recommend going right now.
Yes, and I think that's why it's number one on our list for 2025, because right now it seems like it's so much less discovered than so many major destinations in Southeast Asia. And so if you're going to go, you should go now before more people discover it and it kind of turns into a second Bali, you know? Well, thank you, Laura, so much for your time. It has been so wonderful hearing all about why we should go to Lombok and also just having you be my co-host today. You are so wonderful. And I really, really
Thank you.
enjoyed this episode with you. Everybody listening, please go ahead and check out our list of the top places to travel in 2025. And I just want to give a quick shout out to Travel Lemming itself. Check out our website. We've got hundreds and hundreds of amazing guides. We have over 1,500 actually, as well as perspectives coming out every single week. We also have meetups, which both of us, Laura and I both are hosting meetups. She hosts the one in San Francisco. I host the one in Phoenix. And in addition to those, we also have one in Chicago, Denver, San Juan, Vancouver, Seattle, and Nashville. So those are the 8 places. If you live anywhere near these major cities, we would love to meet you in person. So come on over, have a beer with us, and we can talk all things travel. And yeah, that's pretty much all we've got for you today. Keep an eye out for the next episode where Nate and I interview the rest of our team for the remainder of the list of the top destinations to travel in 2025. But for now, add Lombok to your list of where you're going to go in the new year. Laura, thank you so much again for being here today. I'll let you say goodbye for us.
Thank you so much for having me. I had such a wonderful time, and thank you for letting me talk your ear off about why Lombok is one of my favorite places ever and why everyone should go visit.
Oh, the pleasure was all mine. Well, thank you, listeners, for being here, and we will see you next time.
Bye.